morning, everybody. Welcome to the CNPS conference. Yes. I'm Liv O'Keefe, the Senior Director of Public Affairs here at CNPS, and we are so happy to see all of your beautiful faces. It is just incredible to be back together after all this time. We've got a great program for you guys today. So before we kick things off, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items for all of you. Our first is the conference app. Hopefully you guys have been able to successfully download it. It's called CVent, so when you first QR code it and start to see it, it doesn't say anything about the CNPS conference. You'll see CVent, and you're in the right place if you see that. If you need help, Gavin is downstairs by registration and is happy to help anybody with any challenges you might be having. Next thing, your name badges. At the back of your name badges, you all have drink tickets, one drink ticket that you could use tonight or tomorrow night. If you are attending the banquet, your banquet food ticket is in there too. And who knows what else you might stash in there. I have my room key, for example. Let's see. If you need any assistance at any time during the conference, please feel free to go down to registration, or you can flag a staff person. So we all have blue ribbons on our name badges. They know who to talk to if you need anything. Let's see, second to last, masks. If you've forgotten a mask and want one, we have extras down at registration as well. Please feel free to help yourselves. And then last, we strongly encourage you, if you are social media inclined, to share broadly while you're here. Please use our hashtag 2022 CNPS conference. I'm sorry it's so long, we should have thought of that in advance, but that is the hashtag we'd like you to use, please. We'd love to see your insights and the things that are really lighting you up as you're going through this conference. So please feel free to share. We will share what you share, and it will be just a wonderful echo chamber, and we'll have a chance to really get a chance to share what's going on here with those that couldn't be with us today. So we truly hope this conference is a delight for all of you, inspiring, that you learn many things. And it is my pleasure now to introduce our new CNPS Executive Director, Dr. June Bando.
Thank you, Liv. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
There was some question about whether everyone was going to be able to see me. We actually had a conversation about whether I should stand on a pelican case. So we decided that in the end we were okay. So thank you, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. A special thanks to our public affairs team, the conference planning team, and our conference lead, Elisa Wante, for their hard work leading up to today. Big round of applause. We are so grateful to the volunteers and staff, our partners at Balboa, especially Nia Solandi, the wonderful staff here at the Doubletree, and our generous sponsors for making today possible. Before we begin today's program, I want to begin by acknowledging that the land that we are on today is Tamian land. Native people have lived in what is today San Jose since time immemorial, a region that was known locally as Tamian. Beginning in the 1770s, the Tamian people were forced into the missions, along with many of their Ohlone neighbors and Yokut and Miwok families from the Central Valley. Today, San Jose and the surrounding region remain home to Native communities, including the Tamian Nation, several Ohlone groups associated with specific ancestral lands, as well as the surviving lineages from missions Santa Clara, San Jose, and San Francisco, who are today organized as the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. We are deeply honored to share this space today with Indigenous members of these communities, as well as those who've traveled to be with us today. As the Executive Director of the California Native Plant Society, I want to honor and give thanks to the lands of the Muwekma Ohlone, their ancestors, and the many Indigenous Californians across our state, as the original and steadfast stewards of California's native plants. Looking around the room, I'm struck by how much the world has changed since the last CNPS conference 4 years ago. The COVID-19 pandemic and global climate change have exacerbated and further exposed the disparities historically marginalized communities face. The cascading and interlinked crises of climate change and biodiversity loss are threatening the survival of a staggering number of species, including our own. Globally, ecosystem health is declining, economic pressures are increasing, and responses to the climate and biodiversity crises remain inadequate. But our intent today is not to paint a bleak picture of the present, but to demonstrate hope for the future. It's what the wonderful speakers you'll be hearing from today shortly embody: the action, wisdom, tools, and ideas to move us forward. It's what this entire conference is about, all that we can accomplish rooted together. And that positive impact is already happening. Amid daunting conservation challenges and stories of loss, we're also seeing stories of progress and regeneration, stories of restoring connections to nature in both the wild and the built environments. The work behind these stories isn't strictly for the benefits of plants and habitat. We do this work because we are a part of nature. To save our natural world is to save ourselves. My own connections to nature have been a source of well-being and a sense of purpose throughout my own life. Growing up in the South Bay as the child of immigrant parents who were labeled as aliens and foreigners, the natural world provided a sense of place and belonging. As an undergraduate student at San Jose State, I studied environmental restoration, wading through salt marshes in San Francisco Bay to survey cordgrass, pickleweed, and other native plants with my professor, Lynn Trulio, provided a sense of purpose and connection that inspired me to study ecology in graduate school. Later, I spent several years in the federal government working on international affairs. Although it was fascinating and rewarding work, I was always happiest when work issues intersected with science and when travel brought me into nature. Whether I was sleeping under the stars in the Grand Barra Desert on the Djibouti-Ethiopia border or walking jungle trails in Colombia, nature made me feel more connected to places and to people. Working at the federal level and around the world has deepened my belief in California's exceptionalism. Our environmental leadership, coupled with our values of diversity and equity, enable us to achieve progress at a pace and a scale that can only be imagined elsewhere. CNPS's impacts in advancing native plant conservation, science, horticulture, stewardship, and community-based outreach provide an inspiring example of this. This community that is here today is crucial to preserving California's native plants and places for future generations. But we also know that we can't do it alone. We must expand our meaningful engagement with diverse communities and with Indigenous Americans who have stewarded California's biodiversity for thousands of generations. CNPS's vision for the future is one that makes space for new understanding and perspectives as we approach the challenges and opportunities of 2022 and beyond. In the past 2 years, CNPS has updated the mission, that vision, and strategic plan for our organization, envisioning a California where native plant diversity flourishes, a place where all people have access to native plants in both the built environment and the wild, and a California where people of all backgrounds play a vital role in the conservation of our native plant heritage. Achieving this vision requires us to sustain and build on CNPS's impact while preserving what makes CNPS so special, the passion and the commitment of our volunteers. It will require us to integrate the values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice into everything that we do. It will require restoring meaningful connections, which is why the theme of this conference is rooting together, restoring connections to plants, place, and people. Over the next few days, we want to explore with each of you how we restore our connections to plants, place, and people. We're honored to hear from two keynote speakers who will set the stage for these conversations. Alexii Sigona, an emerging leader for the Amah Mutsun-Ohlone. Alexii is earning his PhD at UC Berkeley, researching California native land stewardship and co-management. And Dr. Jennifer Norris, who is leading California's 30 by 30 effort as California's first Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat. ESRI has also been an important partner in 30 by 30 and much of our collective work. And so we're also very happy to welcome ESRI's Sunny Fleming. Thank you, Alexii and Jen, for being with us today, and to ESRI and all of our sponsors for your ongoing support. To all of our participants, thank you for being here to be a part of this conversation. And thank you for your roles in celebrating, protecting, and restoring California's plants and everything connected to them. I'll close with a proverb that I've heard often in my international work. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. With our strong and expanding network of volunteers, staff, and partners, I'm confident that we will achieve our vision and go far together. And with that, I'd like to welcome Alexii Sigona to the stage. Alexii.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great, let me just get this up. All right, well, Mishmin Arua, Kanraka Alexii. Good morning. My name is Alexii Sigona, and it's great to be here on the ancestral lands of the Tamien-Ohlone people. And the Tamien are the northern neighbors of the Mutsun-speaking Ohlone groups, which is where my people are from. And thank you to Liv and June for your opening remarks. And thank you for the wonderful folks at CNPS for putting this event together, especially Alvaro Casanova, who played a big part in allowing me to be up here today. I am coming to you today as an Amah Mutsun tribal member with a mixed race background, and I'm lucky enough to have been born in a time where coming into my indigenous identity was encouraged, unlike many other generations before me. My motivations come from my experiences as a land steward. And like many of you, the experience of connecting to land has been just so transformative for me. And that's really been driving my pursuit for obtaining a graduate degree at UC Berkeley. I really am just here and in my studies hoping to equip myself with the tools and resources needed to support Indigenous peoples. And today I'm sharing some work that I find very powerful. And I'm using a framework that I hope can help explain and dismantle the barriers between Indigenous peoples and their land-based practices. So my driving question is, what changes are needed to support tribal access and Indigenous-led stewardship in California? So first, I will talk about what access means, followed by a case study of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, and then go into some tips and pitfalls for tribal partnerships that I think can provide some key takeaways for all of us here. And then finally, I will wrap up with some concluding remarks. So I use the theory of access, which is put forth by Jesse Rebo and Nancy Peluso, who offer an analysis of resource beneficiaries going beyond sort of a rights-based framework. In other words, they look at more than just property rights as a lens for examining who benefits from a resource. They examine the many factors at play in these sort of politics of resources. And you might be thinking right now that this framework is pretty sterile in the way that it conceptualizes a user relationship between users and resources. And I would agree with you. But I do think that it has some useful applications with some amendments. So I think when we're thinking about connections to land, right? I think what you can do is if you center indigenous worldviews by talking about indigenous peoples having a caretaking obligation to their lands, then you can really change it from accessing resources to enacting cultural responsibilities to take care of relatives, right? It's not sort of these things are resources for indigenous peoples. Instead, land has agency. And you may have seen the rights of nature framework or rights of personhood that really expresses that, where people are giving legal rights of personhood to rivers and ecosystems and sacred mountains. And I think that's really important. And then also, when we're thinking about access for indigenous peoples, you really do have to account for the legacies of colonialism. We're not too far removed from the violent genocide that occurred here in California. And the subsequent tribal land dispossession, in part through early environmental conservation efforts, really created unequal power relations that have yet to be fully reconciled today. State-sponsored genocide and the theft of ancestral lands is not just a story about one user group coming in and benefiting from resources at the expense of another. Rather, colonialism disrupted societies built on relationality developed over millennia. It severely impacted community caretaking obligations and expressions of identity. And colonialism turned relatives into resources through these European theories of humans having dominion over Earth. And today, indigenous nations are forced to navigate these structures where another nation claims jurisdiction over their homelands and enforces these foreign resource-based approaches to the non-human. And one example being property, right? The idea that we can own non-human entities. That's something that was enforced here and brought here with colonization. And I also want to note that today we're here on unceded territory as well. That there were unratified treaties here in California that make some tribes question the jurisdiction of the state. Okay, so I promise that I'll have some more photos from here on out for y'all. But now is a time to turn to the case study of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. So this is a group of 600 enrolled members descending from the missions of Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista. And as a coastal community, the primary colonial disruption, as June talked about, came with a mission system in the 18th and 19th centuries. Like many tribal nations, the Amah Mutsun believe that we have a cultural obligation to steward ancestral lands. However, this is difficult because we're not seen as being a tribal nation according to the federal government, and we have no land of our own. In thinking about limitations to tribal access, there are some key barriers I want to talk about. First, with the violent genocide, a lot of peoples hid their identity for generations. And so a lot of knowledge systems became dormant. So that's sort of an obstacle when thinking about returning to the land and returning these stewardship practices and caretaking obligations, right? And of course, with the development of lands and ecological degradation, as you see here in the photo on the top with the CZU fires, really scorching the earth, that's also limited tribes' ability to access. And in some cases, right, it's too dangerous to return fire to landscapes, right, because there's too much fuel loads. Additionally, this wage economy that we're in has really affected members, and the majority of tribal members are priced out of their homelands and live, several hours away from traditional territory. So it's sort of a financial and time constraint, really, to be able to access ancestral lands when it takes 3 hours each way to get there. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, private property. A large amount of Amah Mutsun traditional territory in the San Juan Bautista, Hollister area, just several miles south of here, are in these large ranches. And so tribes are not able to enact their caretaking obligations, especially because there are legacies of racism in these places as well. And so that's a key barrier. But one method that the tribe has enacted to confront these barriers is establishing the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. Created in 2012, it's a tribally led nonprofit that creates opportunities to steward ancestral lands, employ tribal members, and collaborate with other land managers. What I've heard our tribal chairman say is that, we don't necessarily have trust with the federal government because of the past genocide and not being recognized, but we see eye to eye with those that care about taking care of the environment. And so some of these partners, represent the state, BLM, National Park Service, state parks, et cetera. But we understand that, the ability to trust is much greater given the mutual interests in taking care of Mother Earth. And, another thing is that the tribe recognizes that we don't have the capacity to steward all of our homelands. There's a lot of stewardship that's needed, right? And, given the centuries of poor management, this land trust model sort of seeks to have more indigenous-led collaborative stewardship projects. But all the projects of the Amah Mutsun are in collaboration with other groups, and I think that's really key. So, as I mentioned earlier, one barrier to enacting our caretaking responsibility was not having the knowledge needed to care for our plant and animal relatives. Because tribal members hid their identity for generations, these lessons often did not get passed down to future generations. However, luckily, the last fluent language speaker of the Mutsun language worked with ethnographer John P. Harrington in the late 1920s, early 1930s, who recorded 30,000 pages of ethnographic field notes. And these were recovered just several years ago and were transcribed by university researchers and tribal members. And so doing this work of bringing back dormant knowledges has been looking at what Ascension left the community. And that's what tribal members see today as, her work with Harrington was leaving these notes and these legacies for the community. And these notes contain teachings about the Mutsun language, which really help understand the worldview of the Mutsun people, cultural stories and teachings, and a lot of ethnobotanical knowledge, because Ascension was a curandera, a healer. And another point I wanted to mention was that the tribe has used collaborative archaeological research to recover information about past stewardship practices, traditional foods, and other information useful as guidelines for revitalizing stewardship and other cultural practices. So pictured here are some charred seeds from Quiroste Valley in Pescadero. And so that was some of the research that we did in collaboration with UC Berkeley to look at, the past dietary patterns of Amah Mutsun people and what the landscape used to look like. And this is done in collaboration. And as you can see here on the right, Amah Mutsun steward Marcela Luna conducts a ground-penetrating radar survey to make sure that we're not disturbing cultural areas, right? There's a whole legacy of archaeology taking ancestral remains, right? It's really sensitive. But we believe, when it's sort of tribally led, using our consent only when we're doing these excavations, that we're able to revitalize our knowledge through this archaeobotany or archaeology. Okay, so now that we have covered the ways that the tribe has made stewardship possible, talking about building a land trust, talking about revitalizing ethnographic notes and archaeological research, I really want to talk to you about how this stewardship is enacted, and that's through the Native Stewardship Corps, which is the premier program of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. And it's comprised of young adult tribal members who are employed and given the opportunity to take care of ancestral homelands. This involves landscape-scale invasive species removal, native plant propagation, coastal prairie restoration, and cultural resource surveys. It's hard work, I'm not gonna lie, but members really find that connection in this practice. And a lot of us grew up without knowing much about our indigenous identity. And so this is a great opportunity for folks to be together in community, to learn from one another, to revitalize language, to practice, ethnobotany just as you're doing your day-to-day field work. So it's really important to provide that space and opportunity to enact these caretaking obligations that I'm talking about, which is connected to access. So one main project that I want to talk about occurs at Quiroste Valley, an inland site within Año Nuevo State Park, where collaborative archaeological research occurred for several years, starting in 2007. So this was the site of a collaborative research project, and now it's the site where the Native Stewardship Corps is enacting these caretaking responsibilities in partnership with state parks. So the research at Quiroste Valley indicated that before European colonization, indigenous peoples were conducting prescribed burns at frequent intervals, keeping the area open and akin to a park-like setting as described by early Spanish explorers. However, the valley today has come to ecological type conversion with coastal scrub and Douglas fir forests shading out the coastal grasslands, right? When you do hands-off management, these things sort of happen. And that really has inhibited our access to our culturally significant plant materials. And also, a loss of biodiversity too. So this has prompted the Quiroste Valley Fuel Reduction Project to help restore the material conditions of the valley, and in the process, facilitate the connection between tribal members and the land. And so I want to note that for many stewards, this is really the first opportunity to practice culture, and it's just a really great way for people to come into their own identity. When you grow up as part of a non-recognized tribe, it's sort of a contested identity. And so now, as a steward, you kind of know who you are, you know where you belong. And I think that's really important for healing for colonialism. So the work at Quiroste Valley is really just a great example of an indigenous-led conservation project. And we rely, on the support, on the resources from other collaborators such as, California State Park, San Mateo County Resource Conservation District to enact this stewardship, right? We're a small nonprofit organization. We can't do this alone. But, really with this vision that's shared between us, a lot of good things can happen. And so far, there's been about 5,000 trees that have been removed through this fuel reduction project. Also, given its departure from past, hands-off styles of land management, the project faced obstacles in the permitting process. So first, we had to argue that this stewardship was a form of agriculture to fulfill county zoning requirements. In addition, there was also opposition to the project from folks who were concerned with the scenic implications of the work and its potential for causing erosion. So there definitely were some obstacles that we had to navigate. I think for a tribe that has been disconnected from a land coming back to it as stewards, some folks who are local and have been there for several generations are uncertain about this work and maybe have just some skepticism about what the project is going to do. And frankly, there's also some stereotypes about Native people and building casinos and things like that that come into play here when thinking about indigenous management and stewardship. So I want to talk about now the next phase of the restoration at Quiroste Valley, and that is the Native Plant Propagation Project, which seeks to plant 120,000 coastal grassland species plugs into the valley floor. You can't just remove the trees and this biodiverse coastal grassland will come up, right? I mean, we're dealing with hemlock all the time. We're dealing with taking out the blackberry and other things and poison oak. And so this phase of the project is really complementary to the work of clearing out the encroaching woody shrubs. And what I really love about this project is that it entails harvesting seed from local sources and natural areas. We work with our partners at Bureau of Land Management, other areas and state parks, and other preserves nearby in this greater watershed to get the seeds and then plant them in a greenhouse at Cascade Ranch, which is operated by Pie Ranch in Pescadero. And then put these plants either directly into the Quiroste Valley or into a field at Cascade Ranch for generating more seed. And so, this project is being led by tribal stewards Josh Shigera and Clarissa Luna, who are here in the back, and alongside archaeo-ethnobotanist and AMLT consultant Rob Cuthrell. I also want to talk about another great project that's coming about within the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. And that is the Food Sovereignty Program. And that is taking place as part of the Native Plant Hedgerow Project, which is designed with the intent to support the well-being of our community by cultivating culturally important food, medicine, and craft plants, as well as providing habitat for our non-human relatives. And this is growing into an agricultural setting on a riparian corridor at Pie Ranch. And so this native plant hedgerow is being designed with attention to plants of interest to tribal members, and will also be easily accessible as it is in a riparian area for members. So in thinking about access, right, the realities of physically accessing natural areas, as many of you know, can be quite rigorous to get to these places where there are, abundant ethnobotanically important plants. And so growing them in a setting where it's more easily accessible for members is really important. And finally, in talking about sort of the work of the Amah Mutsun, I do believe it's so critical to talk about ceremony as being a part of stewardship. Amah Mutsun people and many other indigenous communities conduct ceremony to keep balance in the world for all of us. And it centers the well-beings of the non-human and for others. Amah Mutsun dancers are dancing for the other people, the other non-human beings. And it's sort of, just a great way to support the spiritual connection to place. It provides renewal and really does support our own capacity as caretakers of the land. And so for the past 2 years, we have held a fall ceremony at the Santa Cruz area on a coastal bluff to call home the salmon. And so I think that's just critical in thinking about connecting to a place, is that there is a spirituality that is involved. And our ancestors left us this great gift of these practices and customs that we're able to practice and bring back. So now I want to go to a couple quotes from Amah Mutsun stewards themselves. I've been a summer steward intern for a couple weeks here and there, but I was never someone that did the on-the-ground work, for years on end. And so I think these perspectives are really significant. So the first quote that I want to share talks about how, before I went to the stewardship corps, I didn't know anything about plants. I was just stepping on them. I thought they were all weeds. I figured I'd go to the grocery store, grab all of my food, and that money was my lifestyle. But, there's a lot of knowledge with the land, and I learned the uses. I learned that our pharmacy is out there, our food is out there, and our grocery store is growing right in front of us. So here this steward speaks to the experience that many of us have, from being disconnected from our foods and our medicines, not knowing where it comes from, and also this sort of shift away from the capitalism mindset, once realizing the potential for subsistence practices and building better relationships with land and what sustains us as humans. Another steward, Marcela Luna, who was doing the ground-penetrating radar in a previous photo, talks about stewardship in the following way. Our ancestors took care of the lands and Mother Earth, and it is important to continue that. To get involved in stewardship, it helps you connect spiritually, and you grow and learn along with it. I really do think that's something that drives me personally. During these past couple years, it's a spiritual connection with the land, the animals, with yourself, with others. All around, it helps me grow and be a better person, and gaining my identity, that also comes along with it. And that is so important. And so while we may not have formal federal recognition, I think the stewardship program really provides the space for tribal members to recognize their own roles as caretakers of the environment, and to recognize themselves as belonging to the tribal community committed to land stewardship. And I think Marcela clearly grasps this bigger picture of the work. I've heard some indigenous scholars describe, expressions of sovereignty, indigenous sovereignty, as just exercising your caretaking obligations of being an indigenous person. And that's exactly what this stewardship is all about. And so, for some, it is an expression of sovereignty as well. And now for some key takeaways for this deep dive into the Amah Mutsun stewardship. First, it's crucial to understand that tribal stewardship recognizes the well-being of all of us as being intertwined, as June pointed out earlier in the introduction. And also, our collaborations have given us physical access to tens of thousands of acres, and that works to undo colonialism and its legacies of dispossession, and builds our knowledge systems back up. And so, I think this is indicated by the quotes from tribal stewards and the projects, as providing a transformative experience for many members. And here, a sort of seasoned steward, Gabriel Pineda, shows a newer steward, Moses Pardo, who's a teenager in his first couple of months as a steward, some mugwort, which is a really important medicinal plant for our people. So taking a step back, I want to bring attention to how supporting tribal stewardship in other areas is also important and has impacts across all different partnerships. So indigenous communities have very limited authority to protect sacred lands, culturally significant areas, but these places are sites of power and of ceremony. They're important for tribal nations for many reasons. Like I said, conducting ceremonies, gathering plant medicines, or being sites embedded with cultural significance. And there's sort of a cumulative effect to supporting tribal stewardship in other contexts. And this is important since sacred sites cannot simply be recreated in convenient locations. And their desecration poses grave threats to tribal cultural survival and the capacity to steward land. So, for example, the ability to have renewal ceremonies is integral to land stewardship in all cases. And what I mean by this is, to support our work, let's say, of Amah Mutsun stewardship at Kirose Valley and state parks, it's also integral to support the ability to have ceremony in other places, which supports the capacity of members to conduct these caretaking obligations and really centers tribal worldviews of how to take care of Mother Earth, right? And so I think it's critical when thinking about how to support stewardship, we're not too narrow-minded when we think about holistically how to support the broader vision of indigenous peoples. So here are a few of many tribal campaigns to protect sacred places in California. And so we have places in the Ahachiman and Tongva area, in Keshan territory, in Chochenyo-Ohlone territory in West Berkeley, Medicine Lake up in northeast California. And I encourage you all to think or to learn more about the places that you come from and the different advocacy efforts of indigenous peoples to protect sacred sites, because that is critical for stewardship and access of indigenous peoples. So I want to bring now your attention to our Protect Urostock campaign, which is the Amah Mutsun's effort to protect Urostock, place of our Big Head dance, one of our most important ceremonies. And this is in southern Santa Clara County, just a few miles away from here. There's a proposal for a 403-acre sand and gravel mine on this sacred landscape. And this photo of the Urostock Hills is exactly where the mining would occur, desecrating the area and harming an intact cultural natural landscape and critical wildlife corridor. You can find more information at protecturostock.org, and we're tabling here in the back as well and would love to share more about this effort. So before I wrap up, I really want to talk about some tips for including tribal partnerships. And the first being really educate yourself and your organization about indigenous people's history first before going to folks and asking for them to share knowledge. And really follow tribal leadership regarding their lands and culture. One example is that Amah Mutsun definition of what a cultural resource is does not really align with what the state or the federal government says is a cultural resource. For us, a lot of these natural resources are our cultural resources too, and we care about them a lot. And so thinking about the ways that we think about places, right, as relatives. And partnership really does mean truly listening and being willing to be changed through these relationships. And also, these are sort of long-term trends. I've talked to many tribal elders and they say, look, we have a generational mindset. We're hoping to restore this landscape in several generations. And we hope that our partners, aren't too worried about fulfilling grant obligations or, really having key takeaways in the first couple of years. This is a long, slow process. Colonialism has really disrupted this. It's been centuries in the making. And so, it takes time and building trust, I think, for this. And then more specifically for you folks at CNPS, I think there's a couple tips that we can talk about. First, folks can use expertise to inform tribes and support capacity to lead stewardship. Like I said earlier, a lot of indigenous knowledges has become dormant, but we're still interested in restoring land. You can share personal connections to support co-management and stewardship, find ways to share your specific knowledge of places and habitats. And this might be, gathering areas for people, ethnobotanically rich areas that folks may not know and want to return to. Another thing with this Eurostat campaign, the draft environmental impact report comment period ends in November 7th. And you can write, detailed technical EIR comment letters for development projects that, impact native plant habitats of concern to tribes. Often these sacred areas have a lot of biodiversity, and so there's a lot of overlap in these places for folks to really think about how you can be advocates for protecting land while also protecting, tribal sacred sites. A couple pitfalls to avoid, I'll just leave them up here, but I think there's some stereotypes that you need to avoid, kind of avoiding saviorism, pushing your own agenda is not so great, or using your association with tribes to kind of exploit it is, of course, harmful, or assuming tribal capacity, right? As a non-federally recognized tribe, our members are just volunteers on our tribal council. And so there's a lot of development projects and things happening for us that, it's really difficult for communities to do that. And so not having that expectation is really key. So in conclusion, I really want to talk about some points for rethinking frameworks for conservation and stewardship. So first, it's important to critically examine power relations and the legacies of colonialism shaping projects. It's also, on a personal level, we must all recognize and tend relations with our lands, waterways, and respect the sacred. We all have relationships to land, whether we recognize it or not, going back to this theme of recognition, right? But colonialism has caused us to see our relatives as being merely resources meant for our exploitation. And finally, we must center tribal knowledges and leadership, and in doing so, that decenters Western science as the only way of understanding the world, right? There's different ways of approaching knowledge. And so I think those are key. And seen here is a photo of our chairman with a UC Berkeley research student looking at an archaeological site and thinking about how to restore a place that had just been burned with the CZU wildfires. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to meeting many of you at our table downstairs, and I hope this conference is really meaningful for you all, and you can take away something from this talk. Thank you.
All right, good morning. I think folks can hear me. Sounds good. I'm like talking into my lapel. Alexii, that was amazing, and I'm feeling very inspired by that because especially these ceremonial aspects, when I'm thinking about that, this is kind of its own ceremony, right? We are all here to share knowledge. We are all here to celebrate. We are all here to commune with each other through the work that we conduct in nature. And I find this especially rewarding for myself. I do work with ESRI now. My name is Sunny Fleming, and I'm our industry lead for environment and conservation under state and local government. And ESRI is very proud to help support this conference and support the work that this conference does and that you all do. I was just downstairs this morning looking at some of the posters. I saw lots of maps. I was very happy to see lots of maps. So I know you all are working with our tools and the technology to conduct the work you do. But really what this conference means for me personally is a little deeper than that. I am a botanist, and I started out as a botanist and a plant ecologist with the Tennessee Division of Natural Heritage. And all of this GIS stuff and all of this ESRI and technocratic blah, blah, blah that I'll probably go into in just a second is really secondary. It's just a tool and it's a mechanism for us to do the work we do, to do it better, to communicate with people. And so as I go through some of these slides, I just want you all to keep that in mind. It's technology second in my mind, but the work we do comes first, right? So let's see. I don't even know. I got a bathroom. I'm not stealing it. Hey, are we using this laptop for the slides, or do I just go forward? I just go forward. How awesome is that going forward? That should be another theme. All right. So I will have just some quick brief remarks before we introduce our next speaker, because that's really, that's going to be the exciting bit. But this is the message that we're kind of all faced with right now. It's scary, it's defeatist, that this idea that time is not on our side. We are out of balance with nature. We're creating conflicts and instability. We just heard about this from Alexii, right? This is something that we've been doing for a long time, and we have a long road ahead of us and a long journey for healing, not just our relationships with one another, but as well as our relationships with nature. And I have reason, though, to be optimistic. Like I said, downstairs this morning, I was just looking at the work you all do. Even just conversations I've already had this morning, brief conversations, I feel super optimistic. And the reason I feel optimistic is because while time may not be on our side, I do believe that technology is. And again, this sounds a little technocratic, but keep in mind, technology helps us conduct our work. And I'm already seeing how you all are employing that, and we see some of these examples on the screen here. Technology doesn't just help us do analytics or crunch some numbers. It helps us communicate. It helps us share. It helps bring shared perspective on topics. And there's so much data right now. It's overwhelming. We can't even comprehend how much data is being collected. You all are collecting this in the field. We're collecting it remotely with satellites, with sensor networks. And geography is really the glue that brings this information together to develop the shared understanding. How many of you have taken a biogeography class? Yeah? Man, I want to see all the hands go up. That was my favorite class. So I think you all already have this innate understanding that there is an interconnectedness of our environmental systems, the things that we study and we care about, and, for better or worse, our social systems and our economic systems. And geography is the thing that ties this information together, that helps us take the message that we understand innately and bring it to people who maybe don't understand it innately. Maybe they need it from that economic perspective. Maybe they need it from that social perspective. And we should be able to use this technology to be able to pivot and tell that story, and we can. And that's why I'm optimistic. So the work that we're conducting and the work that you all are conducting, when I say we're conducting, I mean our community. I don't mean ESRI. We just build tools. You all use them. It's happening on land. There's some examples on the screen here. Again, this comes from our community. This one in the bottom right in particular is from Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I'm pretty proud of that one. And it's also happening in the oceans and in our atmospheres. This unimaginable, massive amounts of data that we're bringing together to try and make sense of and synthesize. And why? So that we can tackle climate change, we can tackle our biggest challenges, we can start to heal, we can start to communicate, and technology can be on our side. And that's very exciting, I think. I hope it's exciting for you all. So this we, this us that I keep talking about, that's our community, but it's also folks outside of our community, and we should be very excited, and we should be very optimistic, and we should dive into these tools because we have the tools. The only thing that's limiting us is our imaginations. We have the science. It's sitting in the room right now. And we have the solutions. So I'm optimistic looking at you all, looking at those papers downstairs, hearing how you all are using this. And the next generation really is this idea of collaboration, which is why we're here. Again, kind of going back to that ceremonial aspect, I thought that really resonated with me personally. So using technology, again, as a form to collaborate on a scale that we've never necessarily collaborated on. And California, here, you all have an amazing example of what this looks like. You have a fantastic model that the rest of the US is looking at, but also it's being looked at globally. And that's with californianature.ca.gov, a public-facing portal to share information, to develop shared understanding of the biodiversity in California, of the places that need to be protected to facilitate shared understanding and communication. So not just broadcasting information, not just telling people where things should be protected, but allowing people to explore, to interact, to communicate back with this portal. Really encourage you to check it out. But I'm not necessarily the authority on everything that California Natural Resources is doing. So I'm not going to keep on keeping on. I'm really excited to be able to present our next speaker. Let's get to it. Oh, we don't. Where's the slide? Oh, man. Well, that's okay. You're about to see her face anyways. All right.
Oh.
There we go. Featured speaker. So I'm really honored and excited to introduce Dr. Jennifer Norris. As mentioned earlier, she is the first ever Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitats for California Natural Resources Agency. Is that not the coolest title ever? All right, give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Alexei, you want your computer? Sisters? No, I don't know where that came from. All right. Hi, everyone. Hi. There you go. I am super excited to be here. I'm honored to be here, to be following these amazing people. Hold on, let me just get my act together. There we go. So today I want to talk to you about conservation in California, which I think a lot of you in this room know a fair amount about. And to really help you think about this theme that we all keep hearing, that June started with, which is that it's going to take all of us to get this done. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about my mother-in-law, Virginia. Virginia was born in Seattle, Washington. She went to the University of Washington, was actually the first female student body president. It's pretty cool, because she was born almost 100 years ago. She had Eleanor Roosevelt to tea at one point, but that's a story for another day. She studied art in Paris in her 20s and ultimately landed in California, where she married Frank. She worked for almost three decades at the University of California Office of the President as an executive secretary, raised 2 children, did a whole bunch of camping all over the West when you had to write letters to the pack mule people that you might be coming in 2 months and could they please get a team together. And in her middle life, she woke up one day and realized that what she really wanted to do was study biology. So she started taking classes at American River College in Sacramento, and then at Sac State, and ultimately got a degree from Sonoma State, a Bachelor of Science. And while my husband was in high school, she spent her summers doing field work as a tech at age 50. She tracked yellow-billed cuckoos in the Central Valley, worked on gulls in Mono Lake, studied tundra swans in the Arctic. Her first love was birds. But when she finally landed in Point Reyes National Seashore in the little town of Inverness, she realized that her true love was plants. She joined the California Native Plant Society. She became a volunteer. She painted and photographed plants all over the seashore. She ultimately helped author the checklists for the national park. And I tell you this in part to give myself a little bit of cred with the plant people, but also to make a point that is a truism of my life, which is that for everything that gets done, there's a person behind it. Everything that gets done is done by a person, and that person is just a person. Maybe they had Eleanor Roosevelt to tea, but maybe they didn't. And they just raised their kids, and they woke up and said, I want to do something. Virginia, probably at the prompting of California Native Plant Society, wrote a lot of letters to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state of California demanding that rare endemics on the seashore be protected. Species like Sonoma spineflower and beach leia. Those species are now federally protected and getting restored actively by our park friends. That's thanks in part to people like Virginia and people like you. It is the great sadness of my life that I actually never met Virginia. She was leaving her son's life right as I was coming in. But I feel pretty sure that we would have liked each other a lot. And I think she would have been all in on 30 by 30. So 30 by 30, how many of you have heard about it? Excellent. Well, now you're going to hear some more. So 30 by 30 is, in my mind, it's the great aggregator of all the amazing things that we're already doing really well, and then we're turbocharging it. 30 by 30 is an international movement to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters, or waters, depending if you're a landlocked country, by 2030. 30% of the planet, which if you're an ecologist probably doesn't sound like very much, but if you consider that we're currently at 17% of land and 7% of our oceans, it's a pretty bold and audacious goal. And California is on the leading edge of this movement. I don't know where this goes. There we go. So in October of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, Governor Newsom signed an executive order committing California to this bold and audacious goal. Through this executive order, he said it is now the goal of the state of California to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And then he said, Resources Agency, go figure out how to make that happen. At that point, about 60 countries had committed to the goal. It's now up to over 100. And in Montreal, in a few months, in 60 days, there's going to be a conversation globally to decide whether this should be part of a global international commitment. But we're already doing it. So as part of figuring out how to make this happen, we at the Resources Agency embarked on a year-long listening tour and a series of workshops and conversations around conservation in California and how conservation happens. What matters to people? What are some of the opportunities they see? What are the challenges they face to helping us reach this goal? It was amazing. It was all by Zoom, which was not amazing. But we had 17 workshops in a year. Thousands of people sat through hours and hours of workshops to talk about how much they love this state and how much they want to be part of this movement and all the ideas they had for special places and special species and things that we could do to help them accelerate conservation. We met with over 70 California Native American tribes, some in government-to-government consultation, some in just conversation. We had listening sessions. It was powerful, the things that we heard. Much of what Alexii talked about really resonated as we heard much of that, this desire to reconnect land to the original stewards. So we had a lot of engagement. And in April, we released our final strategy, Pathways to 30 by 30, Accelerating Conservation of California's Nature. I like to call this a crowdsourced document because really it represents all of that input. And I'm really proud of it. And Sunny's right, people all over the world are asking us about this strategy, how we did it, what are the decisions you made, and I just keep telling them I'm just really lucky that I get to be in California. So one of the things we did is we actually established a really strong definition of what it means to be conserved. Those of you that work in anything know that the definitions are really hard. And this definition was not come by easily, but I feel pretty proud of it, and people, again, look to it as a standard. We look for land and coastal water areas that are durably protected and managed to sustain functional ecosystems, both intact and restored, and the diversity of life that they support. So that durability is key, that the protections are lasting, hopefully forever, and that ecosystems and biodiversity are at the center of the land management. So applying this definition, we determined that we have about 24% of our lands that are already conserved. So way to go, California. We're well on the way to our goal. Give yourselves a round of applause. Do that. And we're at 16% of our coastal waters. So that means we have 6 million acres to go in about 7 years and about 500,000 acres of coastal waters. So if that sounds like a lot, it actually is. We have a big state, but we're going to get there. But we're not going to just conserve land for the sake of it. We're not just going to protect acres just to reach a goal, right? We have objectives. Fundamentally, this is about protecting and restoring the biodiversity of California, protecting those rare endemic species, making sure that this hotspot it retains its character and can be resilient in the face of climate change. At the same time, and this was really evident because of the pandemic, we want to use conservation to expand access to nature. We want to bring people that have not historically had access to nature in contact with it, promote projects that improve and expand public health and community resilience and meaningful access to the benefits of nature. We also want to use these lands to address climate change. Lands, functional ecosystems sequester carbon, right? Carbon is the building block of life. More nature actually means more carbon held in our soils, held in our plants. And also, functional ecosystems work better than gray infrastructure at building our resilience to climate change, whether it's flooding or sea level rise. Healthy forests don't burn in the way that the ones we have now do. So these are the things we want to do when we get those next 6 million acres. But we don't want to do it following the same old script. First, we want to really make sure that we center justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have to bring people together, bring people into the conversation that have been historically excluded. That means different communities get a say at what gets conserved. Again, that means bringing nature into communities that have historically been left out. Nature is not to be something far away that you can only get to if you can drive for 5 hours. It needs to be brought close into people. And part of this, of course, is about building our tribal partnerships, strengthening those, looking for opportunities to co-manage, to return access to cultural resources, as Alexii was just talking about, and looking for opportunities for giving land back whenever possible. I'm not going to talk extensively about the budget that we passed in California, but it was historic, and it was to support this work. Nearly $2 billion is going to make this happen. We set aside $100 million first out of the gate for tribal partnerships, to build capacity for tribes, to help them do some of the kinds of projects that Alexii was talking about. We are right now getting ready to release guidelines for what that grant program will look like. It will be only accessible to California Native American tribes, so they don't have to compete with other well-established land trusts and nonprofits that already know the system. We're really proud of that. And at the same, yeah, that's good. That's a clap. At the same time, we want to do this conservation and show the world that we can be the 5th largest economy on Earth. We can advance our clean energy agenda, and we can continue to be the breadbasket to the world. So it's a complicated set of things we're trying to do, but I have every confidence we can get there. You're probably thinking, okay, how does that actually work? Well, it's going to take all of us, because behind everything that gets done, there are people who do it, and some of the people are right here in this room. So 30 by 30 really at its core is about partnership. It's about voluntary, collaborative conservation, coming together around places that we want to protect, working together to establish ways to make that happen, with the state providing resources, technical support, and a lot of cheerleading. So we've established this 30 by 30 partnership, which is really a loose coalition of anybody who's part of 30 by 30 in their mind, whether it's active or passive. You're part of the partnership. So you're all in, whether you know it or not. Really, anybody who's helping with conservation in California fits under our 30 by 30 umbrella. But this partnership is established to sort of recognize that there will be ongoing activity throughout the state, but that regularly we want to come together and share best practices, lessons learned, celebrate our successes. Sunny mentioned our website that was built with ESRI's help. We are really proud of that website. I'll show it at the end. There, if you want to join the partnership and find out how to be part of our ongoing convenings, you can sign up for our mailing list, and you can also see all 17 workshops that are stored on the web, and our cool GIS, which is actually the coolest part of what's there. So we established 10 pathways to 30 by 30. I'm not going to bore you by going through all of those, but what I'm going to tell you is that you can find yourself in any one of these. Whether you're working regionally to identify the most important places to protect, working together to build coalitions and find funding to acquire those, or working with private landowners to get easements, finding opportunities to enhance conservation on existing public lands and coastal waters, Whether you're doing research, whether you're evaluating our progress and letting us know how we're doing, you are part of this movement and you can help. So look, I know things are pretty bleak. I read the paper every day. I get pretty sad. I don't know if that happens to you, but it happens to me. But then I take a little step back and I think about California and what we're doing and how important this work is and how there really is good news. There's a lot of good news out there if you look deeply. And if you can see how we're part of this broader good news and progress being made, you can feel some hope. Here's one. Who is part of making this happen? I think Andrea's been trying to get this done. How many years? More than 3 years, so probably 10. I mean, I've been hearing about this for a very long time, the need to finish our vegetation mapping, to get that backlog of CNDDB data done. It's boring. It's not like something that legislators are excited to fund. But I know, but it's true. Let's just be honest. And secret, don't tell anybody. No, hopefully there's no press here. 30 by 30 is exciting. Like, people hear about it and they're like, oh, I want to be part of that. I don't know what it is, but I want to be part of it. You say CNDDB data, and they're like, right? But that said, you guys got this done. You all made this happen with your phone calls, showing up to meetings, harassing people like me. It happened, and I think it's amazing, and it's a testament to what, if you put your mind to something, you can do. A lot of times I think about taking a step back. So someday your days are kind of stinky, right? You're doing something that's just not that much fun. You're arguing with somebody about something that's unpleasant. But then if you just take a small step back, you can see us as part of this community and you can feel just a little bit of, pride, right? I can tell you that if you take an even bigger step back, we're actually part of a global community of people that are doing this. There's a woman in Montreal named Rochelle. She's working on this. There's another woman in Australia named Heather. She's working on this. A guy, Dorian, in Versailles, France. I've met them all. They're all struggling with the same things, right? What to do about the housing development down the road, how to protect that place from the bulldozer, how to get money for research, how to build coalitions with farmers. It's all out there. We are part of a whole bunch of people that are making this happen. And I don't know, that gives me a little bit of a chill. Like, there are hundreds of thousands of people all over the globe in this world doing what we do. And if that doesn't give you hope, I don't know what does. June and I had the great honor of seeing Kamala Harris speak on Tuesday about climate change. And she admitted that she was a space nerd. Did anybody know that? And that she's the head of the Space Force as the vice president, and that weird, and that she had the opportunity to speak to astronauts when they were in space, which is very cool. And she said that she asked each one, how does being out there give you a new perspective, or does it? And she said to a person, they all said, what is so obvious, but what is so profound? That when you think about our Earth, when you see it from that perspective, you realize how fragile it is, but how interconnected we all are. So, this is my favorite quote about hope. Hope is not like a lottery ticket that you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope requires action. 30 by 30 is a call to action. It's a call to the Heathers and the Rochelles and the Virginias. I see you, Rebecca Johnson. There you are. Carolyn Kolstad, where are you? There you are. All of you. It's a call to action for all of us. As Leah Stokes said at the end of her interview with Kamala Harris on Tuesday, we are the heroes we've been waiting for. So go out there, get it done, help us reach 30 by 30, and have an amazing conference. Thank you.